businesses have written a letter to the paper to back UKIP. I think we've known for a long time that UKIP is the only party that's supporting small business, and so we're delighted that so many small businesses have come out as a result to support us. And the big question, I suppose, is why? Well, I think, frankly, if you're a small business owner and you have been stuck with the burden of EU regulation and the lack of the big parties standing up for you, you've probably come to the view by now that it doesn't matter whether it's David Cameron or Ed Miliband in Downing Street, because neither of them are going to support you and your business. They've both sold out to the multinationals, and they can't do anything for you because long ago they farmed out all control of business to Brussels, as well as selling out to the big corporates. So this morning we're saying loud and clear, UKIP's the party of small business, the only party you can trust to fight your corner. And if you're in any doubt about that, I think you only have to compare our manifesto and what we offer to small businesses with those of the other parties. The Tories' manifesto doesn't mention small businesses at all, quite staggeringly. That's their disdain, I think, made crystal clear. And Labour's manifesto has a couple of hundred words of waffle, but it lacks any detail whatsoever and is so absolutely clueless that it even promises to ensure regulations will be designed with smaller firms in mind. Now, quite how Ed Miliband is going to do that when the EU has total control of business regulations is completely beyond me. UKIP's manifesto, on the other hand, starts very bold and very strong with a £1 billion boost for the high street. By extending the small business rate relief to properties with a rateable value of up to £50,000 a year, we're offering what's effectively a dramatic tax cut for up to 90% of all business properties. That's over 1.5 million in total. A big break for small businesses, a significant tax cut on business rates, which are a disproportionately high fixed cost. We also promise to invest practically in the high street by tackling another big issue that neither the Labour or the Tory party manifestos mention, and that's the decline of our high streets. They've introduced very wrong-headed planning and parking policies, which have let out-of-town shopping centres flourish and led to a lack of vibrancy on the high street. Now, our vision is of town centres where people actively want to come into the town centre and are not put off by high parking charges. So we will very much encourage councils to offer at least 50 minutes free parking to boost local trade, which we think is very much worth fighting for, and certainly our councillors will be rallying for that. Another example of how UKIP's manifesto proves it's the party of small business: we will deal with big companies who deliberately make late payments. Now, again, Labour's manifesto says we will strengthen rules on late payments, but absolutely no detail whatsoever about how they're going to do it. Well, we have a very firm plan, no such flannel from us. We'll introduce a scheme that will allow smaller companies to report late payments to Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs anonymously. HMRC will then have the power to go through the records, all the records of that apparently offending company, and will fine them if they're found to be systematically exceeding their contractual terms of payment. Now, I don't think any of us would want HMRC to have any excuse to go through our tax records. Certainly big companies don't, and especially not as a result of a complaint that for them, in all likelihood, is really for a smallish amount of money. So we think this approach is one that will absolutely work. Finally, of course, because we campaign to leave the European Union, UKIP's the only party that can free business from the huge amount of red tape that they have been lumbered with since we joined in 1973. Despite the fact only 1 in 10 small businesses in the UK trade with Europe, all businesses, 100% of them, are hampered and subject to EU regulations, which cover all manner of areas. There's restrictions on employment, waste management, there are environmental and product regulations, health and safety. The list is endless, and they all combine to make this massive burden on business that UKIP genuinely wants to lift. So what kind of regulations are we talking about? Well, here's a short sample of what's on our hit list. The Working Time Directive, which is so at odds with the British attitude to hard work and is preventing on-the-job training. The Temporary Agency Workers Directive, which has led directly to the use of rising zero-hours contracts by large companies, and, for instance, the Construction Products Regulation, That became mandatory in the UK in 2013, and it's causing endless problems for suppliers who can wait months to get certification for their products, during which time they can't sell them, and it is putting businesses out of business. Thousands more ridiculous inconsistencies, most evident when it comes to the regulation of individual products. So I'll just take one example, which is affecting someone who runs a business that I know. Ammonium sulfamate. It's used in fertilisers. You used to be able to use it to control cut tree stumps to stop them growing back, but the EU banned it for this purpose, while still allowing it to be used in fertilisers and as a compost accelerator. Stupidity writ large, you might say. But those kind of lost product lines can poleaxe small manufacturers. Businesses that have spent years putting money and research time into developing projects that are then banned, leading to job losses, customer problems because they can't get the products they need to actually do their job properly, and growth is immediately stunted. The distribution chain suffers. The knock-on effects are enormous. Businesses that might have grown or thrived end up simply surviving or even failing. So I think perhaps also UKIP's the party of small business, because you look at our candidates up and down the country, many of them, unlike a lot of people in the current Westminster bubble, have actually worked for a living and worked outside that London metropolitan environment, and in many cases they've run their own businesses too. And I do wonder, actually thinking about it, if that's why, because we are the party of business and business people, that's why we're the only party that thought to get our accounts independently audited by the CEBR. So my message to small businesses today is don't vote for a change of management at Westminster, which is all you'll get, whether you vote for Dave or Ed. Vote for a change of government and a real voice championing your cause in Parliament. Thank you. Take some questions.
Ellie Price from the BBC Daily Politics programme. The UN today said that up to 800 migrants had died in the recent tragedy in the Med. There's a meeting later on this week of European leaders. I just wondered if your party would back, if it's decided that European countries, including Britain, should take in more migrants, would you back that? And if not, what would be your approach to stop what we're told is going to be an ongoing loss of life?
Well, I think Nigel Farage has already made it clear. We were the first party to actually call for the UK to take in refugees from Syria when the other parties firmly set their face against those people coming into Britain. And I'm glad to say that we changed the political weather in Westminster on that line. And he's saying again, we must help these people. It's a devastating tragedy. I mean, none of us could have read the headlines yesterday without absolute heartbreak. But it's also a very fine line between saying, yes, we must fulfil our UN obligations, we must take refugees in, but we must also make sure we do that sensibly so we don't open the door to encourage other people to come in. It is an incredibly difficult situation, absolutely heartbreaking, and a very fine line has to be trod, I think. We all want to welcome people here, but as idealistic as you might want to be, and it's in our nature to want to help everybody, you can't, unfortunately. That's the reality of it.
And Ellie, if I could just say, we do also think it's quite legitimate to make the point that an unintended consequence from the Cameron and Sarkozy action in Libya has been to reduce that country to a state where it has no governing institutions, civil society institutions have collapsed, and it vies with probably Somalia to be the most lawless country on the continent of Africa, and that has facilitated a massive increase in people trafficking through Libya. So this does show that the law of unintended consequences can apply to ill thought through foreign policy adventures.
Take one from Rob.
Thanks. Robin Brandt, BBC News. Do you think the Prime Minister has blood on his hands over the events we're seeing in and around Sicily at the moment? And you mentioned the UK needing to be sensible and not wanting to encourage more people to come. How many refugees, be they from Libya or be they from Syria, would be too many, from your point of view, would open the floodgates, and it appears to be what you're inferring?
Well, I think that's obviously a phrase you've chosen to use, and I think it's only fair to point out that we can see post the Libyan misguided intervention, that there's been an extremely bad outcome. But to be fair, we don't know what the outcome would have been without that intervention. In terms of how many, we think that Britain is not an obvious primary location for refugees from Africa, and would be quite unusual for us to be the first safe country. But nonetheless, you know, we should play our role in what should probably be a global response rather than a European one.
Nigel said a couple of thousand yesterday in Rochester last night. Do you think that's too many, not enough?
I think we've got to be talking thousands rather than tens of thousands, certainly. Yeah.
Hi, Tom Beardsworth from Bloomberg. That large £1 million donation from last week, is it? Do we now know where that money is going? And could I speculate in my question that Nigel Farage looks like he's facing a tough battle in that constituency? Are resources being funneled to save him and by extension to save his leadership after May 7th?
Well, Tom, yes, we know where the money is going to be spent, but you don't, and I think we'll probably leave it at that. As for the general election campaign in general, we're very pleased with how it's going. We've never said that we've got any kind of comfortable battles, but we think where we need to be in most of our target seats, actually in all of our target seats.
Morning, Lindsay Watling from the Press Association. Just wanted to know what your reaction is to the report today that the Chilcot inquiry might not be published until next year.
Well, that's nothing new, is it? I mean, we've been calling for it for some time. I think we've had a petition online actually asking for it to be published. What are they so frightened of? It seems to have been beset by endless delays, which seem to me to be completely unjustifiable. And, yeah, I think our response is exactly the same as it was a couple of months ago, that it's about time it was out, and we've always felt they were going to kick it into the long grass until after the election, and once again they're showing that that's exactly what they intend to do.
Right, thank you ever so much.
Very esoteric question. You talked about 50 minutes for parking in the high street. Your manifesto mentions 30 minutes at least.
It was 30. If
Where's
I said
the
50,
extra 20 minutes come from?
Sorry, if I said 50, Robin, I'm very sorry. I misspoke. It's 30.
Okay,
It must have just been my teeth this morning.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mason Hall from Daily Express. I was just going to ask what you made of the intervention of Sir John Major into the election campaign today, and do you agree with the points that we expect him to make about Scotland and the Union?
Yeah, well, the thing about the SNP issue is that the leaders of all the other three major parties have signed a vow to continue the Barnett formula. None of them are guaranteeing English votes for English laws at every stage of the legislative process. So only UKIP will stand up for the interests of English and indeed Welsh voters in the House of Commons after the election. I think it's quite interesting too that David Cameron, you know, last week was channeling Margaret Thatcher with sort of half-baked revivals of things like right to buy or share sell-offs. And this week it's John Major, who, let's not forget, presided over the chaos, the economic chaos of the ERM experiment. And, you know, some observers are saying that the Conservative campaign is in a lot of trouble. And if that's the case, then perhaps the fundamental problem at the heart of their operation is that they have a leader who doesn't actually really know what, to use that quote, his irreducible core is. What are his values? What does he stand for? I think it's much easier to tell what our leader, what Nigel Farage stands for, and what our party does.
I think you only have to read their manifestos. As I said, there is nothing concrete there. It's all waffle, it's all airy-fairy promises. You know, when I was writing ours, I was trying to make sure that I had no sentences like, for instance, oh, we will support cycling, without any definition. You've got to have sort of smart goals, I think, when you write a manifesto, something that the electorate can hold you to account on. And I don't see any of that, I'm afraid, in either Tory or Labour manifestos. It's all too woolly.
Right. Thank you very much. We've work to do.